Hello folks, welcome back to the shop. So this is the second video in the series on the restoration of this Dr. Grabow Starfire that we're doing for Amy Mack. And as I said in the last video, we're going to really focus primarily on refinishing the stummel. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take the stem off and set it aside, because there is a little bit of work to be done on the stem, but that's a minor issue right now. And this band, it's actually not a band, it's an extension to the shank, which is used for the adjustomatic stem. And what I'm going to do is, just to protect that a bit, I'm going to put a little bit of masking tape on it. I don't think there's really much that I could do to it, to be honest, but I'm going to be using some chemicals to strip this, and I want to minimize any effect that I might have on that. I believe it's an aluminum piece. And I just want to make sure that I don't create any corrosion or anything like that. So just put a little bit of masking tape on, and that'll be safe. Now, this is, as I said, a unique project, because really this is practically like new. If this were a well-loved, well-used pipe, I would probably, and I wanted to remove all the finish, I would probably just drop this in an alcohol bath for a little while. And then use some sandpaper to remove the finish after it softens up. Now, there's two reasons I'm not going to do that. One is that this just doesn't need an alcohol bath. It's, as I said, I think it may actually be unsmoked or close to unsmoked. The second reason is that on Grabow's, I've encountered in the past, the finish is actually quite hard, and I'm not sure if it's a type of lacquer or what it is, but it doesn't really soften very much in response to ethanol or grain alcohol, Everclear. So I'm going to use something a little bit more harsh, although nothing out of the ordinary really. I'm going to use acetone, and this is just some acetone that you can get at the hardware store, Home Depot, Ace, wherever. Acetone, some of you may know it as the main component in nail polish remover. It's a very good solvent. One of the things that I like about acetone is that it dries very, very quickly. It evaporates very quickly. It's got a very low boiling point. So almost as soon as it's applied, it will evaporate and be gone. So it's not going to leave any residue behind. So it's a very safe solvent to use in this situation. I wouldn't use it on the internals of a pipe, mainly because it dries so fast that it really isn't going to do any good if you're cleaning the inside of the pipe. But for the outside, it's actually somewhat better than alcohol, because it does leave zero residue and it evaporates so quickly. Now, two problems with acetone. One is that it is flammable and somewhat toxic, so you don't want to be breathing in a great deal of acetone vapors. So if you're going to use acetone, please do it with windows open, a fan on if you can, or even outside if possible. And I've got adequate ventilation to do this. The second is that it can dry. Because it evaporates so quickly, it can actually draw water out of things. So it could, if I were to submerge this in acetone, which I would never do, I'd run the risk of possibly drying out the briar too much and maybe even creating some cracks. So, I'll just be applying it on the surface. That won't be an issue. The other thing that it will dry, though, is your skin. If you've ever used it without gloves, your hands get a very dry feeling. So I am going to put on some gloves before I use this. And I will do that and bring you back as I'm about to start taking the finish off. Okay, we're back with gloves, and I've got the acetone here. I've also got a cable getting in the way, so let's move that. And what I've done is I've made some pads here. This is just shop towel that I've folded over a few times and then cut into little pieces so that I can use them. So this is just one shop towel all cut up, and I'll just be using these one at a time. Let me open up the acetone, and it does have a very unique smell. And let's begin just wiping this and see how this works. You can see it's removing color. And what we really want to do is just get off that heavy finish and kind of start to get this down to the bare briar. This works really well. Now the reason I wouldn't use it on another pipe, if I didn't have something where I was really trying to remove an almost new finish and it was a heavy finish, the reason I'd stick with alcohol is that it's the fumes really, and I just don't want to have to deal with you know, keeping the windows open and the fan and all that kind of stuff. I actually don't have a fan on now because you wouldn't be able to hear me. But you can see how quickly that is removing the finish, which is exactly what we're hoping for. And this is, of course, with no sanding, so we don't have to worry about messing up the markings, the stampings, or anything like that. Okay, and you can see we really have pretty well taken that finish off. A few spots that I'll have to work on a bit more vigorously, just to make sure that it's all off. But already we're getting a good look at the underlying briar. And you know, as I mentioned, they did use the top-notch briar for the Starfire series, and I'm having trouble finding any fills in this. There might be a couple of very tiny fills in here. I don't know if you're going to be able to pick up on that. I can get that to focus. Yeah, they're very tiny, and they're not coming into focus. I'll look at this more carefully. You know, put on the magnifying visor and see, but I'm not seeing any obvious fills. Which, on the one hand, is good because that's. Oh, wait, here we go. Right in here we're getting some. Come on, focus. There, you can get something I can point with here. If you look right in this area here, there, see there's one there's one down here. Oh boy, they're small enough that I almost hate to go digging them out. Anyway, let me, I'm gonna go off camera and do this for a bit more, just to make sure that I am getting all the finish off, and maybe do a very light sanding, and then I'll bring you back and talk to you about the next steps. Okay, folks, so I used one more pad with some acetone on it and wiped this down again, and then I used a piece of 400 grit sandpaper and just sanded everything. Went very lightly over the stampings, but just wanted to make sure that I broke through any remaining finish that might be there. And it's I think it's pretty good now. So it's all sanded to 400 grit. There's no sort of bumps or nicks or anything like that in the pipe. Those were all apparently in the finish. They were just sort of dents in the finish. And grain-wise, you know, this is sort of a mixed bag. So on this side here, we've got some really nice-looking bird's eye that's showing up. Let's see if I can get that to focus a bit better. And I think that's really going to look nice with the contrast stain, and that extends, you know, right into this area as well. The rest of the pipe, you know, there's some more wild stuff here. I don't know how Amy feels about that. I actually like it. I think it's it adds a lot of character to a pipe. And then over here there's this spot that unfortunately is a bit washed out, so I'm not so sure how that's going to wind up looking, but we'll see. It's an experiment. Sorry, Amy, everything's an experiment. So in terms of fills, we do have a few, and let's see if I can get that to focus a bit better. Sorry, the light's not working in my favor today for some reason. Okay, so we've got a couple fills right here. There's a very small one right in here. As I rotate down, I'm actually looking through the camera viewfinder now, so it's a little bit harder for me to see them. Oh, there was a small one right in here that yeah, right in there. And then there's one right on the front here that we may or may not be able to catch. Yeah, right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this this little needlepoint tool, and I'm going to put a drop of acetone over the fill. Although I mean, sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. The same thing with ethanol. Sometimes it'll soften the fill, sometimes it just doesn't do anything at all. But it won't hurt to put a drop of acetone on here. And then I'll just come in with this pin and try to pick this fill out, at least to the point where I can get a layer of epoxy over top of it. So I'll do that and I'll bring you back before I put the epoxy on. Alright folks, so we've got the fills out. They actually came out quite easily. I'm not sure if the acetone helped or not, but they were very brittle and I was able to pry them out without too much trouble. Let's see if I can get these in focus for you. You can see there's a couple here that have been removed, one right there. There was one here that is actually just sort of like a little pinhole, probably a sand pit. And then the largest one was actually this guy right here on the front. And so that's it. I mean, I've looked over this pretty carefully, and those are the only fills that I could find, so I'm glad I was able to get them out easily. And now we will refill those. And the reason I do this is, for whatever reason, the filler that the pipe companies use is this horrible... Oh, I just saw another one. Went over this very carefully, but now I found another one. Well, while I talk to you, I'm gonna take this one out, and maybe that'll be interesting for you to watch. So the filler that the companies use is this horrible pink material, and I don't know why they use it. It just seems to... I'm guessing that they might have bought a very large vat of the stuff at some point, and they're still using it, because there's much better materials. Just simple two-part epoxy picks up stain a lot better than whatever this fill stuff is, and makes it a nearly invisible fill. There we go. So you saw how easy that came out with the pin, or at least I hope you did. I wasn't looking at the monitor. But that fill is now out. And I'll just do one last check here. So yeah, there are much better materials, and like I said, just simple hardware store two-part epoxy works really well. I use there's a 5-minute. I like the 8 to 10 minute just because it gives me a little bit more time to work with it before it sets up. This picks up stain pretty well. I will, if I have it, and if I'm a little bit worried, or if I'm doing something where... So this pipe is not going to have a very heavy stain on it. I'm going to do a heavy contrast stain, but then sand most of that away. And I'm going to do a fairly light, probably brownish oxblood stain on top of it, but a light coating. So I want to try to get as much stain into these fills with the contrast as I can. So in cases like that, where I really want to make sure that I'm giving the best possibility of picking up the stain, if I have it, I'll mix in a little bit of briar dust. And I do have a little tube here that whenever I'm sanding down what I know is raw briar, not if I'm sanding off a finish or something like that. But occasionally I'll be working on a piece of actual briar, and that's not part of a pipe, maybe making a plug or something like that. In those cases, I'll save the dust and I'll mix that into the epoxy. So I'll do that. Got a little mixing dish here, and I'm just gonna squirt out. You've probably used this stuff before. You just sort of do equal parts from the two sides, equal-ish parts, and then we will. Well, let's go ahead and mix that first. So now, as soon as these start mixing, that's when the clock starts ticking. So we have about 8 minutes to get this stuff into the holes, which is actually plenty of time. Okay, and now I'm going to put a few scoops of briar dust in there. And again, this is just to ensure that the finish is going to, or I'm sorry, the stain is going to be taken up by the epoxy. It is absolutely not necessary that you do this. So if you don't have briar dust, and sometimes I don't, it'll work just fine. and how much briar dust you put in, like you saw, I just sort of put in 2 dashes. I've never really paid that much attention to it. You'd have to put in an awful lot of briar dust for it to affect the epoxy, which is the only thing I'm really worried about. So as long as it's enough to sort of color it, that nice brown color, I'm happy. Okay, and now to actually put the epoxy in, I think I'm going to use the same needle, and this way I can control it. Well, I say that not knowing what I did with the same needle. Oh, there it is. Okay, so we'll just pick some up and bring it right in there. Now, it's okay that we're going to have a little bit extra because we're going to have to sand this. So, you know, I'm fully planning on sanding this down again. So I don't mind if it's going over. I just want to really make sure that I'm getting it into the gaps. And you can get air bubbles underneath. So as I'm putting this over, you know, it may be completely covering the hole, but then I want to go in and really make sure that that crack is completely filled underneath there. Okay. And we'll get this guy here. Again, just sort of putting a big glob on, and then using the tip of that needle to work in there and make sure that it's down in the fault. This little pinhole here. Now you might be saying, you know, 5 or 6 fills, this isn't a very good piece of briar, but actually it is. These are not deep defects. These could have probably been sanded out. You would have had a slightly smaller pipe, of course. But, you know, overall this is actually a pretty good piece of briar. And now we got this one up front here. Okay, I think that's it. I'm going to look over this carefully just to make sure I didn't miss anything. And then we're going to let this dry. Now it's an 8 to 10 minute epoxy, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to let this set up for probably about an hour before I come back and sand it. And I'll bring you back once we're sanded. Okay, folks, we're back. The epoxy has set, and I've gone ahead and sanded this back to 400 grit, and I will try to show you where the fills are here. They're easy to see right now because, you know, there's going to be contrast between the fill material and the briar, but once the stain goes on, that contrast will be gone. So you can see there's 2 with one down here. Where's that big one up front? Right here. So while right now it looks very obvious, it really is a superior fill to the pink putty that's used in the factories. So this should wind up looking quite nice once it's stained. Okay, so on to staining. I'm going to be doing a contrast stain, and I'm not going to show you that in detail because you've seen me apply stain before and it's not really all that exciting. I do want to talk a little bit about the steps I'm going to take though, because I'm going to try something a bit different. So I'm going to do a dark brown stain, and the idea of that is to highlight the grain. So I want that to sink into the grain as much as possible. And then we'll sand it off because it'll sand off of the non-grain areas more easily. And then we will stain the non-grain areas with a reddish stain, and I'm thinking right now that's probably going to be oxblood, maybe oxblood plus a little bit of brown. So for brown, we're going to be using this. This is the Pimo/Vermont Freehand brown mahogany stain, and this is a nice dark brown color. I'll be applying that the way you've seen me apply it previously with a bent pipe cleaner, which makes a really good staining brush. So just bend that over, dip it in, and apply it. But what I'm going to do a little bit differently this time, I've done on a few pipes now, is I'm going to heat the briar, and I'm going to heat it with a heat gun. Get it nice and hot before I apply the stain. And that's a tip that I got from Pipe Leisure. And it works really well. It seems to open up the grain and really allow it to sink in. So I'm going to do that, And then I'm going to let this sit for a while. I'll often only wait a few minutes because the alcohol, flashes off pretty quickly. But I'm probably going to give this a few hours because I really want the dye to set. And then I will sand it to 400 grit again. And then depending on how it looks, I may actually do that again. Because again, I'm really trying to highlight the grain as much as possible. So I'll go through that whole process, and then I will bring you back once I have this stained with the dark brown, and we'll talk about the next step. Hello friends, welcome back. It's actually a day later than the last segment. What I did was, as I said I would, I went ahead and did the contrast stain on this twice. The first time I let it sit for a couple of hours before I sanded it off. And the second time I let it sit overnight, not for any real reason. It was just getting late in the day, and I decided to let it go. But as you can see, the grain is now, very, very much highlighted compared to the background wood. And if you're ever doing this and you want to get an idea of what it's going to look like when it's polished up, you can just take a little bit of alcohol. Don't use too much because, of course, the stain is alcohol soluble. Although once it's set, it's probably not going to come off. This is just a little bit of alcohol on a pad, and you can wipe that on and get a sense for how that's going to look when it's polished. And that works with any wood, by the way. It's a trick that you can use for sort of getting a feel for how it's going to look when it's finished. And you can see, there's that brown background from the brown mahogany stain, but yeah, the grain is really standing out in that. And yeah, I think this is going to turn out quite nicely. So the other thing I did, which I didn't think you would mind too much, is I cleaned up the stem a bit. I gave this a mineral oil. I applied mineral oil quite liberally overnight and let it soak in. There was just that tiny little bit of tooth chatter down at the end there, and I cleaned that up with first with one of those fine nail files, this guy here, and then used some of the micro mesh pads. And this is still to be buffed, so there's still a few scratches in there that will buff out. But by and large, the stem is now in really good shape, ready for the buffing wheel. So next step then is to put the final coat of stain on. And to do that, I've mixed up in this little vial here. This is a combination of the brown mahogany, which I used to stain the grain, and a Fibing's oxblood. And the way I made this was, and gives you an idea of how potent these stains are, because you can see this is still very, very dark. This is 1 drop of brown, 4 drops of oxblood, and then 20 drops of alcohol. And we've got probably just about enough in the bottom there that I'm going to be able to soak it up with a pipe cleaner and do 1 staining of the prior. So I'll go ahead and apply that, let it sit for I don't know, a short time, because I don't want this to really sink in too much. I just kind of want it to be a top coat wash of color. So, I'll give it 15-20 minutes or so just to make sure the alcohol is all evaporated. And then I will sand that once again to 400 grit, which is what I've done all along here. And then the pipe will be ready to buff. So we're very close to the end. See you in a few minutes. Okay folks, so we're done with the red stain now, and I've sanded this once again to 400 grit, and you can see it's not, it's not a bright cherry red by any stretch, which is exactly what I was hoping it wouldn't be. I'll get a little bit more alcohol to put on here for you. And give you an idea of what our finished product's going to look like. So, boy, this light is just not being very helpful to me. Actually, let me try something here. Forgive me for a minute. I'm going to turn off the overhead lights and see if we can... Yeah, I know that's dim, but it actually lets the color show through a little bit more true. It's done. So with the overhead lights on, it's too red. With the overhead lights off, it's not red enough. Anyway, the point is, let me turn these back on. What I'm going for here is not a, obviously a bright cherry red color. I don't think Amy would like that very much, but just a red tint, and I think we've achieved that, but without sort of muddying the brown underlying that. So the next step then is going to be to, well, I guess the first thing we have to do is remove this masking tape and see if we've messed up the band at all, or not the band, but the shank extension. Hopefully the answer to that is no. That looks quite nice. Yeah, good. I will clean that up a bit. Probably do a little bit of 4/0 steel wool on that before I buff it, just to make sure that it's nice and clean. And then we will reassemble with our stem here. And we're getting a real good idea now of what the final pipe's going to look like, which is an awful lot like it looked when we started, except it's going to be colored differently and hopefully have the grain a bit more prominent. So I will steel wool the shank extension, and then buff the whole thing and bring you back for the final product. Alright folks, we have a pipe. This is our finished product for Amy Mac, and Amy, I sure hope you like what you see right now. So as you can see, we've got her all buffed up and waxed now. And the grain has really popped on this. So there's that bird's eye that I was trying to show you early on when we first started. It wasn't a terrible finish, but it was very muddy and it was hard to actually see the details in the grain. There's some of that flame grain coming through. This area in here is a little boring, but there is some structure there that wasn't apparent when we first started. You're picking up some of that there. And yeah, we've got some interesting stuff here on the bottom. Overall, I think, while I don't know if this is what Amy was looking for, I do think that we've been able to add a bit more interest. The fills are there. I can find them. I'm not going to point them out to you. I think they look better than the pink fills, but I'll let Amy report on what she thinks about that. The band is nice and shiny now, and Amy or anyone else, if you ever have a band like this that looks like it needs a little bit of work, do just try a little bit of 4/0 steel wool. It's relatively gentle. Even if you stray onto the briar, you're not going to do too much damage, and it will shine that up very nicely. And then the stem's been buffed and polished up, and I have put another thin coat of mineral oil in there that I'm going to just let soak in, and that's just anytime I expose the vulcanite, a new surface of vulcanite, by either sanding or buffing, I like to let some mineral oil soak in, and I think it just helps protect against the future oxidation. So I'll leave that soak for a bit. I have cleaned out the inside with a few pipe cleaners. It was very clean to begin with, so I didn't really have to do any work there. I just wanted to make sure if there was any dust or anything from the sanding that I got that out. One thing I noticed as I was cleaning it, Amy, is that this has a very tight air hole here, so you are going to have to use I think you're going to have to use the Falcon style pipe cleaners for this. And I would have recommended opening up the airway a bit, but the truth is this is a very, very narrow bit, and I don't think we have enough vulcanite to really expand that airway very much. So that is a tight fit, and you're going to have to be careful with that. One thing I have not done yet is restore the stinger. And again, Amy, you mentioned that you wouldn't mind losing the stinger. Well, this is one that just pulls right off, so you can pull it off and put it in that box of stingers that we all would most likely have, because someday you might want to put it back on. So anyway, Amy, I hope that that really fits the bill for you, and that you're now happy with the way this pipe looks. If not, I do think that this pipe is one that would easily go up on eBay and bring you at least what you paid for it, or it would make a very nice gift for a friend who's either a current pipe smoker that likes Grabows, or someone that's new to pipe smoking. I'm sure they would appreciate this. I'm sure this pipe smokes very well from all the reviews that I've read on the Starfires. So yeah, I hope that you or someone close to you can get some enjoyment out of this. And really enjoyed this restoration. In a sense, it was easy, but it was quite a challenge because I didn't have a lot of leeway, which is my fault because I like the history of these things and I don't like to alter them too much. So it was a bit of a challenge for me to do something that I think will hopefully bring this up to your standards, but at the same time preserve the sort of historical integrity of the pipe. So thank you for the opportunity to do that, Amy. I really do appreciate it. Any of you folks that have not seen Amy Mack's channel, please get over there. She's a very warm and welcoming person, and she's funny and sometimes serious, and she's always got something interesting to talk about. So I highly recommend you check out her channel. I will link below and upstairs as well. And check her out, subscribe to her if you haven't. You'll really enjoy the time you spend over on Amy's channel. So with that, folks, I thank you all for following this series, and I will hopefully have something new for you in the not too distant future. Until then, I will look forward to talking to you all again real soon. Goodbye now.